the headline that we had here is just that it's exploring part of a sale of a part of its ownership of Mobileye, a basically an automated car business. But the bigger story, right, that this is just a sliver of, is the disaster that is Intel. Right, Intel basically ever since Genzinger basically took over. What was that, Joel? Back in 2001, 2020,
I,
2022, right?
I think a bigger picture view is there isn't really just one major point to point at that Intel did. I mean, they did a number of things that were like incrementally probably bad decisions over time that, they gave up the whole mobile chip market basically to Qualcomm. They gave up they held on to manufacturing while others said, "Hey, we'll just let TSMC or Taiwan build the thing. We'll design it." And Intel was like, "No, we want both." There's just a lot of things that they at one point they literally were licensing and paying Nvidia for, right, the graphic design chips with their capability and some of the software, if I recall, behind the scenes. And so it wasn't, I don't know that was just one thing, but it was, they went from, the colossus of the field and a little, I can't, really important, but smaller decisions that kind of went under the thing that have led to where it is today. I think if we put it into context, I don't want to tie it to just one officer of the company or one whatever. It's been a long time coming from a lot of reasons.
I totally agree. And when I talk about Genzinger, right, and when he took over in 2022, the one thing is I'll always remember because there was this excitement for a moment because everybody thought that he was going to take Intel asset light. He was going to finally embrace the fact that maybe Intel made a mistake in terms of trying to make all the fabs themselves and everything else and do like AMD did, right? When we recommended it back in 2015, one of the things that people don't realize is before 2015, before 2013, AMD had fabs, right? So fabs, for those who don't know, fabrication, that's the factories to make chips. And AMD basically spun that out and said, "Hey, look, Global Foundries, which is basically a publicly listed competitor to Taiwan Semiconductor, they just make chips without having a bone to pick in terms of who sells them." They said, "Screw it, we're not going to do that. We're just going to focus on designing chips." And then obviously, right, one of our best stock picks was AMD, and it sounded like in the last what 10 years, Joel, right, in terms of how that stock has done since we identified it.
That was
But
in
this Intel,
Barron's.
right? So go ahead, Joel.
That was in Barron's in January 2015, where you were quoted. I think I was quoted, but you were named, and just saying we think AMD is a very different company than people think. It had people thought there were bankruptcy issues, but the credit work, when you use the uniform accounting, told us that they did not have the credit issues that people thought. They did not have the bankruptcy risk. They brought in new management. New management changed their comp, changed how people were paid, changed where the focus. And we're like, there's a lot to love about this name. And since 2015, that's been a phenomenal stock. Probably one of our best stock picks that we've ever pushed out to Barron's anyway. But even
$2 a
any
share.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was $2 a share when we identified it. But anyways, so everybody goes, "Oh, maybe they're going to do that." And then he went the exact opposite direction. He said, "No, we're actually going to become the Taiwan Semiconductor to the U.S." Then obviously CHIPS Act happens, everybody gets excited. But to your point, Joel, because of the 20 years of scar tissue of bad decisions that they had made, right, effectively even with them getting gobs of money from CHIPS Act to be able to build out those foundries, right, still, I mean, this is a company that just look at how it's fallen off a cliff in terms of profitability for the last few years.
So
Right.
this is the issue, right? And when the returns are falling, this is just something that I was taught, I think it was at Deloitte in the strategy group. I'm talking about like 27 years ago, right? It was like 97, 98. And Deloitte strategy group, they said, if the returns of a business are falling, the first thing you want to do as a consultant is tell management to stop spending money. It was a very simple thing. They said, people think you have to grow or die, but it's just not true. When returns are collapsing, the last thing you want to do is throw money at that business. And so what did the CHIPS Act do? It said, here's 8, 5, 10, maybe what could be total $20 billion that you're throwing at a company that doesn't save a company whose returns are falling. You don't grow the asset base. You don't grow the asset base when the returns are collapsing. First, you fix the returns, and then you throw money at the asset base, right? And then you throw money at saying, let's build more stuff, let's build more plants, let's build more fabrication, facilities or whatever else. So the issue is the CHIPS Act, and this is the problem with well-intentions and the path to, anyway, darkness is paved with good intentions, is like, well, we want to help these businesses or whatever else. Well, you don't throw money at companies where returns are collapsing at that level. And the CHIPS Act was essentially doing that and saying, we'll give you money, we'll subsidize you to build stuff. And it's like, if what they already have is collapsing in profitability, for goodness sake, don't give them more money, right? And that's the issue. And so now we got this funky thing where Intel's like, no, we are going to build here, while we're also laying off 15,000 people over here. You're like, so, well, how does that make any sense, right? And so this is where a lot of government spending gets thrown in the wrong place because they don't stop and say, it's not like the government has the altimeter, right? Not that I wouldn't sell it to them, but some parts of the government have been looking at the altimeter. Let me say that, but not certainly the areas in the White House where they say, let's create a CHIPS Act in Congress and let's throw money at something. Whereas we'd say, hey, wait a second, before you start throwing money at these companies, see if at least they have a return that is not collapsing. You don't pour money on firms where their return is collapsing to at or below the cost of capital, and yet that's what has happened, which is why the valuation of Intel has gotten worse. You just don't do that. Anyway, Rob.
No, I mean, you're exactly right. You nailed it. I mean, right? So, I mean, the whole entire thing is this is a company that is literally seeing return on assets fall off a cliff because of all of those issues, and then they decide to go all in, right, and start to invest in this business just as it's collapsing. And so you can start to understand why the market is so ambivalent about this company. Why market expectations for return on assets are not even for them to get back to, as we talked about, cost of capital 5% returns for a company that historically had north of 10% returns. That used to be the most guaranteed business in semiconductor land. It was a $200 billion year in, year out. Intel was, everybody thought Intel was genius because they had this diversified business model where they had a little bit of everything. Sure, the x86, the PC business and then the server business were big, but they had a little bit of everything. They had all this diversified business, so they were just riding 10 to 15% a year ROAs. And then as, quite frankly, technology leapfrogged them and GPUs became more relevant than CPUs, and they never really invested in GPUs because, Joel, to your point, they just let NVIDIA and AMD have that market. And as ARM chips became an issue for them in terms of the PC land and everything else, they were just left behind. And then, they were scrambling to invest. And now, what was it? It wasn't NVIDIA. It was, I forget who it was, but somebody just recently wanted to make a chip with Intel. And they basically just gave it up because the fact that they said Intel can't possibly do the technology they want to do. I forget if it was NVIDIA or somebody else. It's like, right, they're busy investing in these fabs that can't even do what people need them to do. So,
I mean, what you see is Intel now looking like U.S. Steel. The valuation is pricing in perpetuity levels of returns that are below their cost of capital, right? That alone makes it look interesting, meaning the stock is cheap. There's no question. It's not like Boeing, where Boeing... To get to Boeing's price today, you got to have some incredible future performance. To get to Intel's price, they could really do horribly for the next 10 years, and the stock would probably hold where it is, right? So it is inexpensive, but what is that upside that would break them, out of this funk and get them back to the 10, 15% returns of before if they're not on the AI bandwagon, if they're not getting all those, big contracts, if they're stuck in between, should they really be making chips or should they be designing chips, and where they got caught in this kind of vertically integrated mode that doesn't seem to be the best thing. Maybe it can turn out to be something down the road, but I don't see it. And so this ends up being a walk away. But at least we have an understanding of putting the news in a context, which again, without uniform accounting, how on earth could you do it? It's like once you see it, it can't be unseen. And that's why we're so happy to have you all as subscribers and be able to walk you through being able to see it, because then you understand, what's going on in the world better than anybody in the media does, who's not using this.
And I think, Joel, this is a perfect example of that idea of putting things in context of how uniform accounting can. Because you look at this company from the perspective, let's flip around and talk about the bull case here. Right, so if you look about it in terms of what as reported PE is, your as reported PE for this business is 51 times. So you would look at this company and you'd be like, holy cow, this company is way too expensive. This company is, even at the amount that the stock has fallen, it is just trading at nosebleed valuations. But with uniform accounting, because we can step back and put that 51 times PE in context, right? And the fact that it's not really even 51 times PE, by the way, because you can't have a positive PE for negative earnings companies, just, FYI, math Wall Street. But beyond that, the idea that all that the market is pricing in right now for this company that used to have 10 to 15% ROAs, and when you look at the average semiconductor firm, and the average semiconductor firm floats around cost of capital, all the market is pricing for this company is 2 to 3% return on assets. So all this company has to do is become an average business again, and it's worth a ton more, which when you look at a 51 times PE and you're just screening on PEs, you're totally missing that part of the story, which is what's so important. Is it's about understanding just what is the threshold that a company has to get to. And that's what we can do with uniform accounting that we can't really do with as reported metrics, to say, hey, I want to paint a bull case for you for Intel. The bull case for Intel is, guess what is going to happen? Eventually people are going to get tired of buying NVIDIA chips, and people are going to figure out how to make just good enough chips for, instead of GPUs, LPUs, right, language processing units, easy inference making machines and things like that Intel can make at their fabs, that somebody like an AMD or a Broadcom will be happy making with Intel. And then Intel all of a sudden is back to being a 7% return on asset business, and this company's cheap. Now, we're not seeing any of that happen right now, which is why we're not recommending it. But you see a 51 times PE, and you would think, oh, even if they did that, nothing would happen. It wouldn't be worth anything. But in that context, it helps guide you to what you can see.
Yeah, for a minute there, Rob, I thought you were making a bull case. I was like, wow. And then you said, yeah, but no one thinks that's going to happen. That's why the stock is still where it is. So, yeah, we walk away from this name again, despite it being in the news and some interesting things happening. That said, if we heard something, as Rob just said, a bull case like that, there might be a reason to look at this company. Whereas, when we look at across the stocks we talked about today, there are varying levels of embedded expectations, and that's what really matters. And doing that with clean numbers, which you can't possibly do with the as-reported GAAP accounting nonsense talked about on CNBC or Bloomberg, like 51 times PE or whatever, which is just nonsense. There's no way people are valuing this company that expensively, right? That's just bad data. Bad data, shadows in a cave that the media refuses to come out of.